その怪物は許しちゃくれない。
Guys, I got bad news. Godzilla Minus One is not the best Godzilla film ever made. It's the third best. God, what do I even say about Godzilla Minus One? This film has been so incredibly well received by critics and audiences alike, has grossed more than any other Japanese Godzilla film, and has become the highest grossing live-action Japanese film in America. This film has absolutely taken the world by storm, and as you can tell from what I've said at the beginning of this video, I think it's very well deserved. It stands toe-to-toe with Shin Godzilla and Godzilla 1954 as one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made, and in some areas even surpasses them. It's got a handful of problems, and we'll get to those when we get there, but those do not overshadow what is quite possibly the magnum opus of the entire Godzilla series. Starting things off, let's get into the technical aspects of this thing. Everyone has already talked about how good the CGI is in this movie, and I totally agree. For a budget ranging anywhere from $10 to $30 million, this film looks great. I would not call it perfect. When Godzilla himself is on screen most of the time, it doesn't look the greatest, though I can excuse that and chalk it up to the fact that the big green idiot is far more active in this film than he was in something like Shin Godzilla, which had a very similar budget and a Godzilla that looked a lot better in my opinion. There are still great moments of CGI when it comes to Godzilla though, the big example being the boat chase in the first half of the film, with certain close-ups of Godzilla looking like they were shot practically. Overall, I wouldn't call this the greatest CG put in a Godzilla film, but it is very good and absolutely worth the praise. Something else I want to bring up is the score done by Naoki Sato. It's one of the best in the entire series. Haunting and beautiful are the words I would use to describe this score. Songs such as Divine and Resolution have this otherworldly sense of power that perfectly accompany the scenes that they're in. Elegy is a haunting piece that acts as a beautiful backdrop to the aftermath of Godzilla's first attack in Ginza, and tracks like Confusion are just... There's so many more great ones, such as Fear, Last, Pray, and that one song that plays during the really nice and wholesome montage in the first half of the movie that for some reason isn't on the soundtrack. Like, what the fuck, Toho, where is it? There are so many great tunes in here, and it really elevates this into the upper echelon of Godzilla scores for me. However, I am forgetting a couple of songs from here, and those are the remakes of the Akira Ifukube Godzilla scores. I mentioned in the previous video that I hope that Minus One continues the trend of Reiwa Godzilla media by giving us a banger remix of the classic Godzilla theme, and honestly, this is a serious contender for my new favorite version of both the main theme and the march. Listening to Godzilla Suite 1 plays as the big green idiot makes his arrival into Ginza gave me the biggest, and also extremely inappropriate, smile on my face the first time I saw it, and the fact that it's a remake of the Godzilla Rampage theme from Monsterverse's Godzilla makes it even better. Godzilla Suite 2 is also a serious contender for my favorite version of the Godzilla march. The scene it plays in towards the end of the film never fails to get me pumped up and excited, though this time it was intentional. So yeah, between this, Singular Point, and King of the Monsters, we are now 3 for 3 with banger iterations of the Ifukube theme. Now stop doing it. I want a new Godzilla theme, please. Wait, no, not that one. Moving on from there, let's discuss the characters. Minus One is an incredibly solid candidate for the strongest cast of characters in a Godzilla film. Everyone here is so strong and memorable, from the most important mains to the most minor side characters. Let's start off with the two mains, Koichi Shikishima and Noriko Oishi. And let's get one thing out of the way right out of the gate. Their love story is the reason to see this movie. Of course, the Titanic tetrapod trampling Tokyo is what's probably gonna get butts in the seats, but let me tell you, the reason to see this movie is to see the story of two broken souls coming together and rebuilding their lives together to form a new family and become better people because of their bond. A good indicator as to whether or not you're dealing with a good human story is that it's still really compelling even if Godzilla is removed from it, and Minus One is this story to a T. Seeing these two talk about their lives, their hopes and fears, what they're going through in their new day-to-day life, and raising their adopted daughter Akiko is so compelling to me. Another factor in this relationship is that the two of them have a reason to stick by for each other. For Noriko, Shikishima offers a sense of place and protection, allowing her to raise Akiko in an environment that is sheltered from the horrors of a devastated Tokyo, while Shikishima needs her to be a sort of anchor to reality, being someone to comfort him as he panics and spirals out of control whenever the prospect of him already being dead from events early on in a film come up. You buy these two being in each other's lives actively improves it, and it makes Godzilla's arrival in and destruction of Ginza so much more devastating than it already is for reasons that I'm not going to go into here, but if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm on about. I'll talk more about these two when I get into the themes of this movie because their story directly corresponds to that. But for now, let's move on. The side characters in this are also really memorable. Shikishima's buddies that he meets on the Shinsei Maru, Akitsu, Noda, and Mizushima are all really likable, each of them being distinct from each other, with Akitsu being the hard-ass leader of the group, Noda being the scientist who devises the plan to defeat Godzilla in the third act, and Mizushima being the youngest of the group, not having experienced war until Godzilla shows up. The camaraderie that the three of them plus Shikishima form is one of the best parts of the film too. You can buy that all four of them are friends that enjoy being around each other, and while their bond isn't on the same level as Shikishima and Noriko's, it's definitely another highlight character-wise. There are plenty of other memorable characters in this cast, including Sumiko, Shikishima's neighbor who grows from hating him at the start of the film to a genuine friend that helps out with the family, Tachibana, the naval mechanic Shikishima meets at the start of the film who proves to be his greatest obstacle when it comes to character side of things, and Akiko, Shikishima and Noriko's adoptive daughter who is just an absolute sweetheart throughout the whole thing. I could go as far and say that this is the most memorable human cast in the entire Godzilla series, even more so than the 1954 film. It gets even better with Shikishima's character arc, but again, we'll get to that later as it goes into more spoilery territory. There was one person I missed out when talking about the characters in this film, and that of course is our title character. What did I think of Godzilla in this film? He's aight. My thoughts on Godzilla Minus One, the incarnation of the monster, are very similar to Godzilla Minus One, the design. It's good, but doesn't leave too much of an impression on me. It gets the job done, and it does that job well, but I'm not wowed by Godzilla's appearances in this film the way I was with Shin Godzilla or Godzilla Earth. I like that we finally have a Reiwa era Godzilla that actually shows emotion and is more active than the laser shooting mountains that we've been getting so far. It offers a nice change of pace compared to everything else we've had. But I feel like my thoughts on this Godzilla would have been the same whether or not he was expressive. I will say though, there are quite a few sequences in this film where Godzilla is legitimately menacing. Normally, Godzilla sequences are more cool than they are scary, and that just comes down to the fact that big lizard destroying stuff will always be sick. Even films that actively try to make Godzilla genuinely frightening, such as GMK or Shin Godzilla, don't really scare me. Minus One though has a handful of sequences where I'm pushing back into my seat and chattering my teeth. The two that everyone talks about are the first scene with Godzilla in the ocean and the atomic breath scene in Ginza. These sequences showcase Godzilla as a frightening, overwhelming, and almost alien force like the series has never done before. When the atomic breath scene starts, with the dorsal plates launching out of his back and all the people are standing there watching, it's genuinely unnerving because of how real it all feels. Like if you saw a 160-foot tall lizard shooting its plates out of its back like a machine, you'd be morbidly curious to see what happens next, and the results of which are absolutely devastating for a multitude of reasons. If there is one critique that I have when it comes to Godzilla, one that is sorta minor but is a critique nonetheless, it's his design. While I've gotten used to the proportions, one thing that bothers me is that this design is mostly seen during sequences out at sea. A proper implementation of the sea monster aspect of Godzilla is something I've wanted to see for so damn long, and I'm so incredibly happy that Minus One does these scenes incredibly well, but at the same time, with the design that looks far more comfortable on land than it does in the ocean, it makes for kind of an awkward juxtaposition, seeing this land-based creature partake in massive oceanic sequences. I say that this is a minor problem though, because I can totally buy that the reason Godzilla is like this is because he's a nuclear abomination, horrifically mutated from his original form, which we do see happen in the film itself. It's a minor critique, but still one I felt like sharing. One last thing I want to bring up before we get into spoilers are some of the negatives that I have, because while I do love this movie to pieces, it isn't perfect, and I feel like it would be unfair to not talk about the things that didn't work for me. I'm gonna hop back onto Godzilla really quick for the first complaint, and this is a light spoiler, though nothing severe. We see it in the trailers, it's fine. The entirety of Operation Watasume hinges on the fact that Godzilla needs to take time to regenerate after using his heat ray, and while I like that it actually affects him in a negative way, I wish we could have seen that more throughout the film. He uses it on 3 separate occasions, and all of them he comes out fine, minus some scarring here and there. I think if Godzilla was animated to be a bit more winded, and if he had sustained more injuries after the fact, I would have been able to accept this way easier than I do. The one big thing, and what to me is the biggest problem with this film, comes down to its script, primarily in the third act. A lot of big events and sequences happen for the sake of benefiting the dramatic tension of the film as opposed to being actual logical decisions people in this world would make. I'm going to be incredibly vague here to avoid spoilers because these events I'm talking about are pretty major, but towards the very end of the movie there is a sequence where a character does something insanely dramatic and intense and it leaves everyone else, as well as the audience, on the edge of their seats. And all I have to ask is whether or not this choice had to be so vague to all the characters involved in the story. The answer is that it isn't, and it's primarily made for the audience who, just like the majority of the characters in this scene, don't know what the outcome of this scenario is going to be, even though they don't have to. Just to be clear, I don't hate this scene, and I do think that it is very well directed and acted. It's just the biggest example I can think of this particular complaint that I have with the movie, and that goes for any time that logic is thrown to the wayside in favor of drama. The film itself does a good enough job at keeping the dramatic tension all the way through, again, thanks to the brilliant direction and acting, but that is really the only thing that keeps this from being any higher than it is. There are a couple of tiny details too, such as some CGI moments not being too great, which I mentioned earlier, or how the pacing of the film slows down a bit prior to Operation Watasumi beginning. But at the same time, these are also problems that I have with Shin Godzilla, and that is my second favorite Godzilla movie of all time, so it isn't so damning to the overall film. Okay, so that's basically all the major non-spoilery stuff that I wanted to mention in this video. So from here on out, it's nothing but spoilers. Jump to this time if you don't want to be spoiled on so many of the film's big twists as well as its ending. And for all of you that are still here, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so I mainly wanted this to be the section where I talk about Shikishima's arc. It'll be a fairly light rundown of my thoughts on it because I do want to talk about this movie more in depth at a later date, but right now I'm fine with giving a truncated version of it. So I think most people can agree that the main theme that Minus One is all about is summed up in one word: live. It's the driving force behind much of the film's big set pieces. The Godzilla attack on Odo Island concludes with Shikishima and Tachibana surviving the incident. Godzilla's rampage in Ginza has Shikishima trying to save Noriko, only for her to sacrifice herself so that he can survive. And the entirety of Operation Watasumi is explained as a war that no one will die from as a way to spite Imperial Japan. It goes much deeper than that though. One of the big things that the first 15 minutes of the movie establishes that Shikishima is a deserter. Someone who abandoned being a kamikaze pilot because he got cold feet due to his parents wanting him to come home alive, and everyone hates him for it. So what does he do in response to that? He starts living. Enter Noriko and Akiko. The two of them quite literally sprint head on into his life, and have made it substantially better with their arrival as it gives him a new purpose to take care of both of them, which is how he gets the job on the Shinsei Maru and meets up with the boat boys. It's a purpose that's detached from his life as a soldier in World War II, and we see that he really does enjoy it, both making friends with the boat crew and coming home to his family. It's so nice to see unfold. I love it. Then Godzilla shows up. The infernal demon that haunts his dreams suddenly turns up again in a far more powerful and destructive form, and suddenly the worst thing that could possibly happen happens to Shikishima. He loses the love of his life, and now all he wants is vengeance against this wicked entity. The whole plan of Operation Watasumi begins being constructed, with Tachibana even being brought back into the plot to help with the restoration of the Shinden that will be used by Shikishima in a suicide attack to kill Godzilla once and for all if the operation doesn't work. Operation Watasumi is conducted, and right before Godzilla gets the final win against the two warships, Shikishima performs the suicide act to everyone's shock and horror. Except he doesn't, with a parachute opening up and him attached to it. It's here that we get a flashback to Shikishima and Tachibana running through the many buttons and mechanisms of the Shinden, with Tachibana specifically pointing out an ejection lever, much to Shikishima's surprise. Tachibana's only reply being, live. I definitely feel like the push Shikishima needed to go through with the ejection was Tachibana telling that to him. The one person who hated Shikishima the most telling him that he doesn't want him to die, even after what Shikishima did to him during the war. And then we get the ending, where we get the reveal that Noriko made it out of the Ginza attack alive, with plenty of injuries for sure, but she is okay. She asks Shikishima if his war is over, and all he can do is break down by her bedside, as she embraces him. Not gonna lie, when I first saw the scene in the theater, it nearly made me cry. Is it cheesy? Hell yeah. She survived what is essentially a nuclear explosion, but it perfectly encapsulates the theme of this film. If Shikishima actually went through with the suicide plan, he would have never known that the woman he loves the most came out of the most horrific chain of events in the movie, and I think that's really beautiful. Also, I think that if Noriko had stayed dead after the Ginza attack, well, it arguably would have been more interesting. I like this angle not just because of what it means thematically, but also I think think it's definitely deserved for a main character. Shikishima went through hell and back, but to see him not only succeed, but get the reveal that everything turned out okay for him in the end really worked for me emotionally. And I know that some of you are chomping at the bit to ask, but what about the black mark on Noriko's neck? Here's my take on it. So it's a pretty popular idea that the black mark on Noriko's neck is Godzilla's DNA that was blasted off when he shot his atomic breath in Ginza, attaching itself onto her and essentially reviving her. I love this take on it because of what it means symbolically. Noriko, the very thing that Shikishima loves the most in life, is still alive because of Godzilla, the very thing that brings him the most suffering. I've seen the idea being tossed around that the scar is supposed to be a form of radiation poisoning, and while I think this is probably a more valid interpretation, I don't like what it means for the story. As we just discussed, the whole idea of this film is live. So seeing that Noriko was brought back to life only for the film to pull out the rug from right under you and go, actually she's gonna die from radiation poisoning, feels a bit cheap to me. I think this is the correct interpretation, and if that's the case, then I reject this reality and embrace it with my own because I like mine better. There's plenty more that can be said about this ending, and I definitely will say more at a later time and date, but for now, I think I'm just gonna cut things off here. Minus One delivers a beautiful main theme. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Alright, that's basically everything I wanted to say in regards to Godzilla Minus One, and as for any closing thoughts, Minus One is an absolutely amazing film that stands toe-to-toe with some of the best in the whole franchise. After seeing this film for the first time, I've been unable to keep this thing out of my damn head, and you know what? I kinda welcome it. Never before have I seen a film that has gotten me to think about what it does and what it has to say. While it does have a couple of issues, it really is one of the best in the franchise. Personally speaking, I would place Minus One right alongside Shin. For me, they both share a joint number 2 spot for favorite Godzilla film, with Shin having more interesting aesthetics and a stronger script, while Minus One has stronger character work and emotional beats. I cannot say which one I like over the other. So yes, my statement at the beginning of the video is a lie, I am aware, but also, I don't care. Minus One is an achievement in this franchise, showcasing that Godzilla is still just as great as he always has been, even after a near 70-year-long run. This is an absolute must-see for anyone who likes Godzilla, or even just anyone that likes good movies. I'm sure you're gonna get an absolute kick out of this, and I'm gonna give Godzilla Minus One a solid 9 out of 10. But of course, these were just my thoughts, and I want to know yours. What did you think of Godzilla Minus One, and where does it sit in your Godzilla ranking? Be sure to sound off those thoughts and more in the comment section down below, and be sure to follow me on my social medias and join my Discord server if you want updates on upcoming videos or just want to hear my goofy rants about all sorts of stuff. And if you liked what you saw and want to see more, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. Either way, I'm Sam the Geigen fan, hoping that you have a lovely rest of your day and telling you all to wash your hands.